morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me here today as a guest speaker. It feels very much like a special occasion because Westside was the first Unitarian Universalist church I ever visited back in 2003. You gave me a mini carrot cake as a welcoming gift. And let me tell you, as a 13-year-old, that is solid. A solid welcome. I even mentioned this in General Assembly during a workshop, saying that's the reason that I'm here doing this work. Someone gave me carrot cake, and I was like, okay, I'm sold. Good to go. Kind of a joke, but still, thank you very much for that. It's an awesome tradition, and I also really appreciate the music and the community that I feel being here with you today. Well, I serve as the network coordinator for the UU Young Adults for Climate Justice, as was mentioned earlier by Myron. And this is a community of young adult Unitarian Universalist activists between the ages of 18 and 35 who live all across the United States and Canada. And it was founded with the generous support of the UU Ministry for Earth in 2012. And since then, it's really been blossoming. And it's been 1 year that I've been in this position as a network coordinator, and I will continue to do so for at least another year. So this service actually is part of a challenge that the UU Young Adults for Climate Justice gave ourselves. The Unitarian Universalist faith as a whole has started this campaign called Commit to Respond about climate justice. And our network is an organization that's helping to sponsor this campaign. And in sponsoring it, we said what we will do is encourage young adults who traditionally do not have strong congregational interest in sermons or opportunity to preach, to come and preach about climate justice 100 times over a few years. And so it was a challenge, but it's happening, and this is one of 21 services that have already been done since last April from young adults about climate justice. So we have about 80 more to go, and it's very exciting to be here preaching. In recognition of Indigenous Peoples Day last Monday, the topic of today's sermon is not climate change overall or climate justice overall, which is a large topic. It's the relationship between Indigenous rights and climate justice. The video that we attempted to watch is on YouTube, so you can watch it later. It's a preview trailer for a documentary that is not yet released and is still in production. It's called The Condor and the Eagle. The woman speaking is a Native American grandmother from Oklahoma named Casey Camp, and she lives along the route of the Keystone Pipeline. She is one of the 4 main characters in the film, along with young activist Takaya Blaney, who is also featured in this preview, who is from the Sliaman First Nation along the coast of British Columbia, where the tar sands mining is being piped through pipelines for export, or where they are attempting to do so, but meeting great resistance. She is in the video describing her feelings and experiences participating in a tar sands healing walk in which people gathered from across North America to walk in this place of great extraction. And you can see the videos of the consequence of what it's like. The top NASA scientist who does a lot of climate justice organizing now, he says that it's a carbon bomb, that if we develop all of the tar sands, we will undoubtedly reach climate chaos and not be able to really have a thriving, stable society. And so that's why tar sands is so intricately linked to climate justice. It represents the transition from conventional fuels to unconventional, more polluting and more environmentally devastating to Indigenous people who live there than we've seen in the past, which even that was something that we will discuss. The filmmakers Clement and Sophie Guerra, who are from Germany and France, have been traveling over 1 year documenting complex stories of Indigenous environmental justice movements across North and South America. What Casey was telling us is an indigenous story and a prophecy about a sacred tree that carries fruits of justice, compassion, and the great morals that we as Unitarian Universalists uphold. And the title of the film is based upon yet another prophecy, that of the condor and the eagle. The condor and eagle are archetypes representing original peoples from South and North America. And I imagine Sophie and Clement chose this name because a goal of their documentary was in a way to participate in the realization of this prophecy. They invited these Canadian activists and these activists in Oklahoma and Texas who were directly impacted to travel to South America and meet with indigenous people in the Amazon, also experiencing great oppression for trying to protect their forest and their culture from oil extraction from countless companies, many of them based in Texas. So the prophecy, the goal, is that the people of the world, the people of the plains, mountains, forests, or great coastlines, our whole entire human family, and not just the native people of North and South America, might in these coming days and years renew an ancient connection and harmony between ourselves and our earth. I share this film clip with you today because it's honest, hopeful, inspiring, and prophetic. I hope you will watch it. This story that Casey explains of an ancient tree whose fruits hold lessons of truth, of inherent worth and dignity and goodness of humanity. The message is this tree will not die, despite great troubling, toxic times that people are going through, and that the people of the earth will awaken as if from a long, drugged sleep, beginning timidly at first, but then with a great urgency to search again for the sacred tree. That's exactly what she says. Perhaps it is a sign of truth and of it being a time of great change that Albuquerque, New Mexico, Lawrence, Kansas, St. Paul, Minnesota, Anadarko, Oklahoma, Olympia, Washington, Alpena, Michigan, Portland, Oregon, Bexar County, including San Antonio, Texas, Denver, Colorado, and Fayetteville, Arkansas, have all replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day this year. In the last 2 weeks. Woo! That's a big story.
It is.
My message to you today is that the wisdom and rights of Indigenous people must be recognized for us to actually create just solutions in these times of mounting climate instability. Jeremy Five-Cross from the Nez Perce Nation tells us that for far too long, thousands of years of Indigenous culture, history, learning, and wisdom has been dismissed or ignored as prehistory that has nothing to do with today. One of many examples of how that occurred is how Indigenous stories of great earthquakes and tsunamis in the Pacific Northwest had been passed down for centuries because their ancestors experienced seismic events that rocked from Washington all the way down Colorado or California. And they told these stories for centuries. Because we weren't paying any attention to what Indigenous people were telling us, geologists didn't know large seismic events were a threat in that region until 1984. They discovered this when the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission was considering putting nuclear power plants in Washington and Oregon. In the past 50 years, in the next 50 years, the chance of another magnitude 9 earthquake, such as occurred centuries ago, is 1 in 10. And our infrastructure there is in no way prepared for it because we had no idea it was going to happen. So this is just one example of many about how disregard of these stories, which are told in a way different from how we tell stories sometimes today, has consequences. And that changing that, if we start changing that, many, many things might change. For 500 years, this continent, known by many people as Great Turtle Island, was dominated by a colonial, capitalizing mindset that for generations raped, murdered, enslaved, and sought to patronizingly control Indigenous people. Such an inclination in social order is greedy, and it's a sickness in this world. Such an experience has caused microcosmically deep intergenerational trauma that we all now share as part of our human biology. This is being discovered more and more through science of late, that this is true. We must acknowledge that in order to even challenge it, in order to be free from it and to build a new way, we must recognize that we are deeply hurt. Christopher Columbus, he never even made it north of Cuba. So why is the United States of America celebrating a slave trader? Why is the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve Bank shutting down to honor a man who literally wrote, "Let us in the name of the Holy Trinity go on sending all the slaves that can be sold"? As most of you probably know, that is not our theology. Basil Davidson, a British scholar of African colonial history, coined Christopher Columbus as the father of the slave trade, because not only did he oversee enslavement and selling of thousands of Native Americans, Columbus was ruling what they termed the New Indies when the King and Queen of Spain issued license for the very first transatlantic shipment of African slaves in 1501. Writer and educator Bill Bigelow, in an article published October 7 by the website Common Dreams, says, if Indigenous people's lives mattered in our society, and if Black people's lives mattered in our society, it would be inconceivable that we would honor the father of the Atlantic slave trade with a national holiday. As UUs, we affirm that Black lives matter, that Native lives matter. We choose to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day. And it doesn't take much looking to see that Columbus Day is a holiday intended to give popular validation to the Christian doctrine of discovery narrative, something that the Unitarian Universalists Association General Assembly voted democratically to repudiate as an act of conscience in 2012. The doctrine of discovery is a legal concept. It's the concept of the act of landing in a place that lacked Christians and claiming it Christianity by Europeans actually created a land titleship, a document for the European nations who financed these expeditions back in the 15th and 16th century, a right to that land. The root of this are papal bull decrees from Pope Alexander VI, and the prerogatives handed down to explorers like Christopher Columbus and John Cabot by the monarchs of Europe. Some of these original documents literally sanctioned reducing people to perpetual slavery, taking away all their property, and doing everything in one's power to make non-Christians miserable. The Pope said this. Yet we still treat this as legitimate legal precedence through the United States Supreme Court of Law. We perpetuate this colonial political narrative. The USA considers itself to be the successor to the monarchs of Europe in terms of our right to this land. But how did Europe get these rights? In 1823, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled in the judgment of Johnson versus Ramsey versus McIntosh that Native Americans had a right only to land occupancy, not ownership, in a judgment that was peppered with racist sentiments from the very beginning. Here are the first three sentences. On the discovery of this immense continent, the great nations of Europe were eager to appropriate to themselves so much of it as they could respectively acquire. Its vast extent offered an ample field to the ambition and enterprise of all, and the character and religion of its inhabitants afforded an apology for considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy. The potentates of the Old World found no difficulty in convincing themselves that they made ample compensation to the inhabitants of the New by bestowing on them civilization and Christianity in exchange for unlimited independence. What does that even mean? The character and religion of its inhabitants afforded an apology for considering them as a people over whom the superior genius of Europe might claim an ascendancy. The superior geniuses of Europe manifested a Christian colonial conquest competition and instituted a system of land titles that boiled down to the first there gets to claim it, originally meant to prevent warfare between colonizers. And their superior genius on that one didn't really hold up, did it? That narrative of first there gets to claim it inherently denies equal humanity of the people already inhabiting the lands of North and South America. During this era of discovery, Pope Alexander, when laying out this doctrine, basically said that the relationships with and treatment of original peoples of the lands discovered was a matter to be dealt with by the parties staking the claim, however they saw fit. Translation, God doesn't care too much what you do to these people. The Supreme Court again in 1955 affirmed this discovery doctrine. And again in 2005, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote, "The title to the land occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nation, and later the original states and the United States." So my question is, why are indigenous nations not included in the sovereign? The international diplomatic community since 2008 has declared that they are sovereign nations with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Canada and the United States have both failed to ratify this declaration, which I have zero doubt is not linked to our centuries of building laws and institutions that are based upon other belief systems, that because they lacked Christianity, we had a right to their land. Columbus Day is a federal holiday because we as a nation are still denying sovereignty rights of original people who live on this land. And this needs to change. Our system of commodifying land and minerals is based in using titles as an exclusionary tool for amassing wealth and power within only certain sectors of society. A process Christopher Columbus started, literally through enslavement. The cumulative consequence of this is essentially too large for most of us to fully imagine, because we're so complicit, we're so reliant, we are wound up in complex contradictions so far down this rabbit hole that it took until 2008 to say, yeah, indigenous people were people with rights to land and freedom. Yet, if we don't recognize this link between our bureaucratic and economic treatment of beautiful lands and our systematic failure to treat people of color as humans of equal worth and dignity, I question whether we will ever find our way back to that sacred tree that was referenced, or see the end of the disproportionate suffering of Black and Indigenous communities at the hands of the fossil fuel industry, the uranium industry, the gold industry, in reality our entire industrial economic complex. Grace Lee Boggs, an incredible American Asian activist from Detroit who died this week at the age of 100 years old, tells us in the middle of catastrophe, actually last week, in the middle of catastrophe, in the middle of disaster, people, particularly people who have already suffered, see an opportunity to evolve to another stage of humanity. This truth drives the climate justice movement. And it's why Indigenous people who have witnessed 500 years of environmental racism in North America, from forced relocation to nuclear weapons testing and nuclear waste disposal and uranium extraction and on, as mentioned before, why these people have a role as leaders and messengers in this movement for taking action about this largest problem we face of climate change. If we recognize sovereignty rights of these tribes and nations, the entire situation would be different. The Indigenous Environmental Network has this to say about climate justice. Industrialized society must redefine its relationship with the sacredness of Mother Earth. 1. Leave fossil fuels in the ground. 2. Demand real and effective solutions. 3. Industrialized, developed countries take responsibility. 4. Live in a good way on Mother Earth. We know that fossil fuels are the blood of our economy, and that you cannot switch off of fossil fuels in one day. And I do not believe that's what the Indigenous Environmental Network is trying to say. And it will really take opening up our minds and opening up our hearts with humility to come to the solutions that need to happen. If a 16-year-old can figure out how to make plastics not out of fossil fuels, which is 8% of global production, and if 2.2 million pounds of plastic is dumped into the ocean every hour, and all of that can be converted back to fossil fuels, yet we don't, there are tremendous amounts of possibilities in terms of what can happen. And we have to be ready and demanding for them. That is what the Indigenous Environmental Network is saying. Chris Kratz, a white Unitarian Universalist, anti-racist, writer, and community organizer, says organizing with people privileged by systems of oppressions requires confronting feelings of inadequacy, isolation, and powerlessness. But it also requires working through denial, fear, guilt, and shame. Which is why I was kind of hoping we would say the free pulpit and the free pew bit, because I'm sure not everyone is feeling too great right now with what I'm saying to you. Chris Kratz also says, however, that when we work together as people who are privileged by systems of oppression to end those systems, it opens the door to profound possibilities of creating new identities, cultures, communities, and institutions rooted in liberation rather than domination for all of us. That is our goal, our thread of hope, our call to action. I am in this work because I believe that the actions of this century can determine the direction of the next 100 centuries. Science backs me up on this. What we do today matters. Discovering climate justice means replacing the doctrine of discovery and its manifestations of greed and domination in our society, which go deep, with a doctrine of equity, peace, and responsibility for each other and the sacred earth that sustains us, finding a way to make those principles that we uphold every Sunday a part of our systems that make our society thrive. We are called to do this, and we can do this, and we must do this. I will end today with another quote from Grace Lee Boggs. You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it. Let us work together to be the change that we seek and that this world is calling for. We are not alone. You are not alone. We are in this together. Rise in body or spirit, please join in singing hymn number 298, Way Sound on Census. We'll sing all 5 verses. The last 2 verses are on